We are live, and I am super excited today to have Sally Foley Lewis on the show. She is a middle manager leadership and professional development expert. She is the author of 6 books with a 7th on the way. And one of her books is happens to share a title with my book. We had no idea, but we both wrote books about middle managers called The Middle Matters, that I think, Sally, are like perfect complements to each other, because my book is about sort of written for the middle manager, and your book is written for the C-suite and managing the middle manager. But she has a whole bunch of other books as well. We are super excited to have you on the show, and I will start off by asking you what's on your mind.
Well, thank you for having me, Jeff and Eric. And I think what's on my mind is about how do businesses leverage and scale themselves by using the middle.
Yeah.
How can we make more use of or value, nudge nudge, wink wink,
Yes.
our middle managers more, especially when we have a business that needs or wants to scale. So
Yeah.
I'd love to get your ideas, and let's mash that up.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. So I think this is a fascinating question. It's funny because this came up earlier today on a conversation, and this person asked the question in a conversation I was in. He said, "How do you sorry, I like my brain just had a freeze there for a second. What are the differences between managing the middle in a small company and managing the middle in a large company?" And so I'm going to ask you, I'd be interested in your take as you work with smaller companies, startups, these smaller companies scaling. Do you find that it's different what they need to do with their middle folks, or is it the same problems just on a different scale?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because if we take the first yes, the differences is where we need to help our owner entrepreneur learn to let go, because this is their baby. This is the thing they've birthed as such, which is a horrible image in your head if you've gone there now. But sorry, folks. And it's 5 o'clock in the morning for me right now. So
yeah, that's right. I should have said that.
Sorry. But we've got to help the owner, the person who's birthed this idea, to let go and let other people step up. You've hired them.
Yes.
You're spending money.
Yes.
Investing in their expertise, let them be their experts. So that's a big one. And I've seen firsthand an organization just churn through simply because the owner can't let go.
Yes.
And so it's about helping the owner set that vision and mission so people understand it almost as much as they do. Sorry, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's this expectation many times that people who come on are going to hit the ground running, and that there's this sort of, if you go with the sort of Carol Dweck fixed mindset concept of like, you can't grow into this role. You have to be the perfect person for the role from day one. And I think that is part of the problem. The other part of the problem is I think that the founder often doesn't understand that the first hire, their second hire, maybe even their 5th hire, it's going to actually reduce their effectiveness, not increase their effectiveness for a certain period of time, at which point they will actually start to experience those benefits if they wait through it. But I don't think there's just this lack of understanding that actually the first hire is a slow down for a while until you get them up to speed.
It's that S curve, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so I can't remember, Sally, if we talked about this when we talked recently, but in Liz Wiseman's book Multipliers, she has this amazing analogy for, I think, what you're talking about, which is this idea she calls it the diminisher. The diminishing leader is one brain with many hands, and I think a lot of times that's the challenge, right? Is in these small businesses is the founder is like, this is my baby. I'm the only one who knows.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think the moment you get into, I find whenever you find yourself saying, "I'm the only one," you usually should stop.
Yeah, that's the clue, right? That's the clue, because you will be the only one. It's the self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think that's the first part of that issue about middle managers, the differences. And I also think in smaller businesses, a middle manager may not be managing other frontline leaders. They may actually just be managing, I don't mean just, sorry, but they may be managing and leading the front line. And
Yes,
so your organizational chart, you'll sit in the middle, but it might not be a very tall chart yet
yes,
as you're scaling and growing. So that to me is the difference. And I think in that smaller scene, if you are the middle manager, then there'll be definitely the pull towards being, if you've moved from the front line into that supervisory middle
right.
manager role, the pull to stay doing operational work will be
Yes,
will be there. Now that also happens in big organizations, but I think the move away from
right,
individual contributor to people leader, I think, is a lot clearer sometimes,
right.
depending on the culture of the organization. So
But it's interesting because I mean, you and I both know this very well, is neither type of organization likes to train folks when they, very much when they move into these roles, right? I mean,
what
this
if
is
I train them and they leave?
right.
Yes.
Yes, right. What is that phrase of the thing about, what if I train them and they leave, and then
Mm.
the other person says, well, what if we don't train them
Don't
and they
train them and they
stay?
stay.
Right. But this problem of how you end up with people in the middle who don't know how to lead the middle, and in the
Mm.
co- in the big corporate world, it's just the cost, right? Is what I've heard, is people say, well, it's not like, it's too expensive for me to train all these thousands of middle folks, so I'm not going to train them. I'm just going to train the high potential ones, and everybody else is going to try to have to figure it out on its own. And I say, given what you and I both do, like, obviously we disagree with that, like, very strongly. But I actually don't say it just because what we do, but also because really, when you get that middle layer doing the right things, it can be really powerful. You get so much more out of having many brains instead of one brain with many hands.
That's right.
But the flip side of that is, on the small business side, it seems like the issue is they're often scaling so fast that you
Mm.
suddenly have, the first salesperson in the company, who was just an individual contributor because they were the only salesperson in the company, suddenly is the head of the sales team because they've been around the longest, but they've maybe never managed anything at all.
Or wanted to.
Right.
I love going into certain industries and with the middle managers and asking the question, who actually enjoys what they do as a middle manager? And I make it safe enough for people to tell me the truth.
Uh-huh.
And, it's quite surprising how few hands go up. They never
Yeah.
signed up for middle management, but the
Right.
business scaled so fast. I was the only one standing, when the boss said, step forward if you want to be a manager, and I was just too slow to step back. It's that kind of, hey,
So
me?
I have a question for you, Sally. Is why do you think it is that we treat, we talk about people, oh, this person might not be cut out for being a middle manager or whatever, but then we act like they're a failure. I mean, I feel like there's this sort of like sense of, in order to succeed, you have to advance through the ranks and become increasingly, bigger teams, etc. And that people will pay lip service to this concept that actually, oh, it's so great to have someone who doesn't really want to move up, because then they're going to just become more, better and better at what they do, and we're going to be able to capitalize on that. But that is not how I think it reads to many people. Like,
Exactly.
you either have to advance or you have to accept
Yeah.
your fate as the individual contributor.
Yeah, I think organizations, Jeff just said it, right? They don't invest in the helping a middle manager step into a leadership role and a management role. They don't help the middle manager understand to let go of individual contribution and step into people leadership. And then they whinge about the fact that they failed. So you get what you get because you did what you did or didn't do, right? And so, and to your other point, you know, I just had this conversation with my husband probably 3 days ago. He has been tapped on the shoulder again to step into a supervisor's role. Now, my husband's an individual contributor. He loves it. He does his job. He would love his job if the bureaucracy of it went away. You know, like he just goes to work, does his job, comes home. He's a work to live, not a live to work. And he's really clear about that. But it's interesting that he got tapped on the shoulder again. This is probably the second or third time in his career. And he ponders on it. And I said, well, what's making you think you should or could do this? And he says, oh, you know, you get a bump up in salary. And I went,
really?
divide that by 26 because we get paid fortnightly.
Right.
Is that still worth it? Right. Is that really what you want to do?
Right.
And this is me not trying to convince someone or people to not be middle managers, but you've got to know yourself.
Right.
You know, it is not worth it for my husband to become a middle manager because he doesn't want to. It's not worth it for him. And I love that because he is really clear. And it's just a little bit of external pressure being put on him at the moment that makes him think about it. And thinking about it's great. Really assess it and understand it. But if you want to be a middle manager and you want people in your organization to step up into those roles, then we have to actually set them up for success.
Right. Well, so this actually leads me to a question that I have been trying to figure out. I'm not sure I know what my answer to this is. So I'm going to ask you just to make your life difficult. Is, do you think, like, so you often hear people say, I don't want to be a middle manager. To what extent is that because there are people who just literally don't really want to manage? And to what extent is that because they either see people or they've experienced being in middle management and they're not trained to do it? So like, do you think that more people, some of these people that feel like they don't like middle management or they don't want to be in management or I never wanted to be in middle management are really just like, yeah, what they're really saying is, I don't want to go do something that I have been not trained to do. And it's really frustrating to, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I don't know my answer to that.
I think all of that, because again, this is not a black and white thing. It's not one or the other. It's, you know, someone might be I can remember when I was employed years ago. And I can remember a middle manager saying, they don't pay me enough for this stuff.
Yep.
And, you know, but that was in the moment, in that context, walking out of a tough meeting. But most other days they were happy and loved what they did and loved the team. And so it's contextual, right? I think it's super, super contextual. And there are people on the line at one end of the continuum. There are people who really shouldn't be in middle management, but there's a pressure on them to earn more. There's a pressure on them to be seen to be climbing some sort of ladder.
Yep.
There's a pressure on them from all around to have this success, you know, inadvertent air quotes, but the reality is they're probably missing their joy from doing the work that they were trained to do. You know, I had that with one particular client where I coached them back out of management, back onto the tools, saved their marriage.
You know, here's a question. Do you think it's inevitable, both of you? Do you think it's inevitable that that work has to be like we're talking about is, and you know, it makes I get that like tightness in my chest just thinking about this, but this, you know, and we joke about corporate PTSD, although it's not a joke. Is that an inevitable facet of work? Is that an inevitable facet of work in the modern, you know, approach to work? Does it have to be anxiety provoking? And I think a lot of so as you are talking, there's anxiety as the middle manager that you're being judged and screwing up. That's creating problems with that's one set of problems. The other is the people who are the most difficult to manage are usually being driven by their anxiety that you're judging them, that you're that they're not performing, that they're not being given the right level of autonomy. Like there's so much anxiety that has to do with growth. Am I going to get where I need to go, keep my job, et cetera, et cetera. Is that an inevitable phenomenon, or is there something that can be done differently?
I think that it has been, yet it shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And it
But
doesn't
is there something
need
that
to
can be done to make it not be on a more than just a anecdotal level?
I think so. I mean, it comes back to setting your people up for success. And I don't think, I think there's stress, some level of stress is inevitable. And there's good stress and there's bad stress. There's the excitement of bringing a deal in. There's the excitement of scaling the business. And that's a positive stress when all your other elements have been looked after, when your people are being set up for success. They've got the skills, they've got the training, they've got the level of authority and decision making they should have at their level. So, I'm with you. It is inevitable, but I don't know that it needs to be as bad and as negative as it actually is.
Well, I'll sort of jump in and say my take on this is very much about what kind of mindset we're cultivating sort of culturally in an organization. If the mindset is basically what I like to call the achiever mindset, this is results, achieve, right? Actually, I was thinking as we were talking before about this guy that I know who he got promoted from senior manager to director, and his wife says, "Congratulations, how long is it going to be before you start stressing about becoming a VP?" Right? Like this constant stress of I need to achieve. And my take on this is that's a little bit like always focusing on the punctuation and never focusing on the sentence, right? Like if the flip side of this is, how do I get people into a learning mindset? If I can get in people this mindset of, hey, we're here to learn, we're here to improve. We actually, it's fun, making mistakes is not the end of the world as long as we learn from those mistakes and we're constantly getting better. And it's fascinating how uncomfortable. So I actually think is a much better mode to manage a company in, right? Is we have a learning mindset, and we create this learning mindset by constantly asking questions, why did you fail, but what did you learn? Or how are you growing your team? How are you making them better? Or who are you helping in the organization? Those kinds of questions can really create this learning mindset. It's fascinating how uncomfortable that idea, I think, makes senior leaders, because their immediate reaction is, if I'm not focused on results, then I won't get results. And what's funny is that's actually, in my view, actually not true. I don't know. I'd be fascinated your take on that, but
it's not true. But yet you see time and time again that the shareholders, the investors, the board are pushing for the numbers. And so, give me the numbers. They don't often have, or give me the happiness score, do they? Right. So, how's our happiness today? Where's our portfolio and the director looking after happiness? Now, there's an idea.
I also need to bring into the discussion that there's this double standard that I believe is at play with respect to leaders. And there was a concept that I heard recently. I think this was in the context of racism in particular, but I think general concept can apply, is that racism is when you judge your people of your background by the top 10%, and people of another background by the worst 10% of the membership. I feel like leaders will sometimes judge themselves by their, only by thinking about their positive accomplishments, and they'll judge their middle managers as failures because they're only looking at the bottom 10% of their performance. One example of this was one of the worst presenters I've ever worked with was the CEO of a company I worked with. He's never going to watch this, so it's probably, I won't say his name. He was terrible presenter, like awful. And I made one very, very early on. I never presented outside of any company that I'd ever worked for. And I made a bad presentation, and I was labeled by this guy forever as this guy can't, Eric can't present. And turns out I present all the time now. I'm totally fine at it, solid B plus, occasionally an A minus, but I'm never worse than a B, right? And so, this is a phenomenon that I think is rampant, which is, oh, I do it perfectly every time. It is not true. Most of the people who are judging you make mistakes all the time. Founders mess up all the time. They just give themselves a different level of a break.
So you're saying that, I'm sorry, I've got two screens, and I just thought of, excuse me, are you talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect? And so I just quickly got it up on the screen. The cognitive bias whereby people with limited knowledge or competence in a given intellectual or social domain greatly overestimate their own knowledge or competence in that domain relative to objective criteria or the performance of their peers. So as you're saying, I'm thinking, this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect.
It's a corollary to the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is they're judging themselves as being more knowledgeable. So that's the Dunning-Kruger curve. But then they're putting other people on the bottom of the curve without necessarily having evidence.
It's interesting that you say that, but I actually think there may be another sort of an opposite effect of that is happening, that may be causing the same outward appearance, which is that these leaders are profoundly insecure.
I think that's true.
And so their insecurity is, how did this person's presentation make me look bad? And it makes them feel uncomfortable because they are so worried that everybody is judging them. And the result, so it's actually not that they think they're better, is that they are all, we're all basically all suffering from this sort of massive sense of imposter syndrome. And they're like, and so when somebody causes them to feel uncomfortable in the sense of, oh, I looked bad, they have a hard time forgiving because it's like, oh, this person made me look bad, and I can't take a chance that this person is going to make me look bad. And so this is where I go back to that point of like, how do you get people out of this mode of like, a bad presentation? This is a great learning opportunity, right? As opposed to like they could have, Eric, in your story, they could have said, wow, Eric didn't present very well. We really want to invest in Eric to become, one of our top people. He's really smart. He does great work, whatever. We need to focus on how to help him become a great presenter. They could think that, but instead they think, oh, he made me look bad. And again, it flips it's that whole like me thing, as opposed to, how do I get people to learn? And I think it's very hard because people who in sort of more traditional, corporate world, the people who become the top usually become the top because they sort of, somehow lucked their way up to the, to the C-suite or whatever, and have always been sort of waiting for that other shoe to drop. Right. Like, and they were the ones where the shoe never dropped, but they're like, when's my luck going to run out? I don't know. That's sort of my take. I don't know if your thoughts on that.
I don't know if it's that the shoes never dropped. I think it's a case of quite often when shoes are dropping, there's no one else to fix it. So they just move them sideways, and then they move them up, and then they move them sideways, and they move them up, because that's what that is quite common. Right. There's plenty of organizations that I could name, but I won't, because I'm a good girl, who I know internally someone's made a mistake, so they'll move them over to a project. It's like,
yes. Oh my gosh, I've seen this many times.
And then, okay, so the group survives, the project improves, and then it gets moved. They all get moved up, and it's like, okay, all right. Yeah. So I don't think it's a lack of shoes dropping. I think it's how it's handled when it drops. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and so it's interesting too that you say that, because I have this thing I've been talking a lot about recently, and I've been writing some articles about, called crisis leadership. And this idea that people often get put into leadership roles because they sort of took charge in a crisis, and they start to believe that their value to the organization is, based on their ability to, be great in a crisis. So they sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously create crises, because
I call
that's
them.
how
Are we talking about drama queens?
yeah. But it's like, but I mean, you've worked with many more organizations than I have. It's rampant. Like this is not like that's a quaint little thing that happens every once in a while. I mean, it's everywhere, right? There's these, people that are literally, I mean, I think that's what, the one brain with many hands from, is all about, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm about to step into a presidency role and of an association, and another president of a sister association asked me, "So, what do you want to achieve?" And and me being me, so I just don't want to stuff it up. And then, here's my answer. And then she looked at me and I said, "We have a strategic plan. I just want to work the plan." So to your point, I don't want to create something for the sake of creating something.
Right.
I want the organization to stay the plan, to stay the course, because that will be the achievement. And I'm okay if at the end of my tenure, someone says, "Oh, we're doing all right. Wonder why?" And I'm not that visible, from that perspective.
Right.
Lots of managers and lots of leaders create in order to be then the crisis leader, in order to feel needed and valued, and I think that it's quite counterintuitive to actually say we don't need crisis, we just need to do our work.
Right, exactly.
Well, Jeff, maybe we could ask our AI overlords to jump in with some questions.
Well, before we do that, though, we've actually got some questions coming in from a viewer. It's our dear friend Dr. Kim is asking some questions. So I figured I would bring in one of those questions, and then I'll bring in a ChatGPT question before we move on. But so she said, an organization's culture is a result of what the executive team leadership tolerates. So what is the ultimate solution? How do middle managers get what they need to advance if their organization won't support them?
Good question. I've had middle managers approach me, pay for their own coaching and pay for their own development, and I don't think that's okay.
Right.
And to be honest, leave.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. I know these guys wanted me to be funny.
That was very serious.
Not funny, right? Like if you have a genuine, sorry, that is funny. If you have an absolute genuine need to develop and you need that support and it's not coming, leave.
Right.
Now,
actually, the interesting thing is there's this effect that I've seen many times is like whatever you come in as, that is where usually your leadership will lock you in there, and you can go up maybe one level, but they cannot see you going much further than that. So leaving is actually sometimes a good way to break that, because now they're setting this kind of baseline at a different level, and that's not a smart operational approach for the company. You're losing the good people, but that is nevertheless, I think, a reality.
Yeah. The other situation that I did some work with a huge bank, and they could identify that in large departments there was very, very little room to move up a ladder, and so they felt as though that was also impeding development opportunities. And so they were trying to encourage, and they had a lot of consultants come in, and then I was engaged to develop some online live sessions about getting people to think of the value of moving sideways.
Right.
Like move sideways in order to broaden your understanding of the organization, get that different perspective, get those different skill sets, as a tick-tacking way to move and grow and develop, because that way you still felt like you were part of the organization, you still felt challenged. So if you still have an ethos around what the organization's vision and mission is and you don't want to leave, then maybe go sideways.
Yes.
But if the organization is just not supporting you, then stop supporting it.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting that you say that, because I have this thing that I call it the Crazy Ivan. It's named after the move from the Hunt for Red October. And I'm like, whenever I've gotten stuck in my career, I do a Crazy Ivan. I go find, like, at one company, I was like, I'm going to go find the most undesirable job that nobody else wants, and I'm going to go ask for it, because I was being told, well, you're really great, but you're very strategic, and we need somebody who's got tactical, capabilities. And I'm like, I got tactical capabilities, it was just at some other company and they didn't know. So I'm going to go find the most tactical job nobody ever in their right mind would ask for it. I'm going to go basically do a really good job at it. And there were definitely moments when I did that I was like, well, that was a really stupid idea, but it actually did work out. Like that, the next job I got was the job I was hoping to get to. All right, I'm going to shift over to our friend ChatGPT. So I always ask it for 10 funny questions, in this case, to ask an expert on middle management development. And I usually say, do you want thought-provoking first, or do you want absurd first?
Oh, you choose.
All right. Well, this what I'll go. I think this, I don't know if this is really absurd, but it's kind of goofy. It says, is synergy just corporate slang for we have no idea what we're doing, but we're in this together?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I just posted this week about corporate bingo. So
yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this one is
a drinking game. Anytime you hear the words.
So the other one it asks, this will be the thought-provoking one, is middle managers, and there's a joke in here, that's why it's funny, but it's actually a serious question. Is middle managers are often described as the glue of an organization. Does this mean that we're stuck here forever?
For some,
yes.
Yes.
But I do think, do you agree with that idea that the middle managers are the glue of an organization?
They are absolutely the conduit. I wouldn't use the word glue, because to me, or let's go for as many metaphors as we can find.
Yeah.
So
connective tissue. There we go.
Yeah, not glue. I think, to me, where's my little burger? So to me, they're the burger, right? They're the best bit. They're the flavor. They're the nutrition. They're the reason why we go and get a burger, right? They're also the bridge of which all the information flows, right? How many more metaphors can we come up with in 30 seconds?
I've heard them called the engine. They're not the wheels, right? But they're the engine, whatever. They're not the driver. They're not the wheels.
I do think that middle managers, though, it is. Actually, this would be an interesting little bit of research. I often have thought that being in middle management is a really slow. Like, you can get promoted really quickly into middle management, and then it's really slow to then get into the C-suite. Right. So, I wonder how true that is.
Well, I think I've seen some meteoric rises of people. Usually I observe that and I'm like, I don't know how that person got there, but I've seen meteoric rises of people going up very, very fast. It almost always has to do with somebody who just decided, I'm just going to tie my fate to this person. Like somebody with some power says, this is my person, and they just go for it. And that's kind of where the luck comes. If you get the wrong bosses, if you don't end up being the golden child of the right person, you won't get there. And this is why. Yeah.
I also think that's where you get some really disastrous behavior, right? Because somebody ends up, isn't it fascinating? I'm going to use a name here, but it's fair. He's not going to care. He doesn't care about Jeff. Isn't it fascinating that people that talk about, getting rid of the middle recently, like Zuckerberg, like, why he says to get rid of the middle? He's never been in the middle. He doesn't understand, right? Like obviously he's created a huge company and whatever, so you got to hand it to him and whatever. But the idea that he is he's going to be a great leader, having never had to sort of really understand, that path or whatever, is not, and then sort of looks at it. And we were talking before we hopped on the call, like, when you I often talk to leaders and they'll say, C-suite level leaders, and they'll say, oh, the middle, I'll say I wrote a book about middle management. They're like, oh, middle managers, they're the ones that sort of screw up everything. And my immediate reaction is, I think I know where the problem is, but I think that, yeah, no, it's not the middle, right? I mean, the middle, there's problems in the middle, but it's because, there's this view of these people are just in my way. And that's where, you keep seeing these articles about the great unbossing or flattening organizations. And it's so interesting to me because it's like, I feel like it's like a cycle, every couple of years,
yes,
we wipe out the middle, and then we're like, oh, now there's no place to move anybody up, and we can't train anybody, and there's nobody available that actually can move to the suite or whatever.
I think with that, I makes me wonder if we get rid of the middle managers, and that, not as an extreme kind of measure,
right?
And my question to the C-suite is, how are you going to then be the influencer, the inspiration, the empowerer, the motivator for the front line? Like, you have to fulfill that leadership role.
Right.
So are you going to do it?
Right.
Can you do it? How, we talk about ratios of like, no more than leading or managing up to 20 people. And even that's probably a lot.
Right.
But if you get rid of a level, then that ratio just blows out. And we all know how great it is when you don't know who your boss is and your boss doesn't know who you are.
Right.
Which I have had a family member be employed be stationed in one particular place for about 18 months, didn't even know who their next line supervisor was.
Yeah.
They were a generic email.
Yeah, I just ran into this issue recently at a company I was working with. The guy was like, I don't know who my boss is. He's like, I've got three people that I report to, and I'm like, well, what do you mean you have 3 people? Like, I was like, who writes your end of year review? He's like, I have no idea.
And I think there's something to be said for 5 minutes where you go, I don't know who my boss is. Woohoo! Okay,
yeah.
That lasts 5 minutes.
But you have no mechanism for understanding whether you're doing the right thing. But then I had a similar experience, although I knew who I was reporting to. Same guy I was talking about before. 5 minutes of one-on-one time in 2 years reporting to him.
Ooh.
Like I never had a one-on-one conversation with this guy beyond he had like a quick question for me. And I wish that was an exaggeration, but it really is not. I mean, I don't think there was cumulative more than an hour that we spent in one-on-one in 2 years. And like, how do you expect someone to, implement your vision if you've never shared your vision with them, if you've never checked in with them that, to make sure that they're doing what you need to do, that you're doing for them what is needed? Like, it's not viable. I mean, we managed to get by with that because we had a really good team of, at the next level down, really good team that we were able as a group to figure out, what to do and how to make things work. But yeah, complete lack of awareness.
So I'm curious then, Eric, with that person, what were they doing with their time if they weren't being focused on leading the people and helping their people be the best version of themselves and deliver the best?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is that they were doing was starting a new startup every couple of months. Essentially they're like, oh, I'll just start another one. And so, that's kind of the way. And that's kind of like, you got to wonder, for example, with, I'm going to name names right now, Elon Musk. Like, how is it that he is doing a great job leading 5 companies and also being, part of the government and interfering with international politics? How is he doing that? He's not, right? I mean, he's not.
Well, he's probably got his people doing.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting too, Eric.
No one wants to go there, Eric.
No one wants to go there. Like, we're not talking Elon Musk. We're gonna get banned off of YouTube or something. But anyway,
go for it.
But anyway, so but an interesting point though, I think is I think you've told me in that story before. Part of the issue was you were doing something that he he didn't like, that's not my area of expertise. I don't really care about the stuff that you do.
Oh, that was the next boss who replaced.
Oh, that was a different boss. Okay, but you mentioned that before. And, I find that one interesting. I find that one fascinating.
Eric, write the book.
I often say to people that
by the way, I just would want to say, like, between the three of us, we've averaged 2 books each.
They're all Sally.
So happens actually more than 2 books each. Just so happens I'm at 0 and you guys are at
This aren't averages great. No, I was just going to say, but it's interesting to me, that particular situation, because I always say I could not have written my book until I had a role where I was managing people that did stuff that I had no understanding of how to do. Like, it wasn't until I couldn't get over involved. Somebody asked me the other day, what kind of manager do you think you were? And I said, I think for most of my career, I was probably a benevolent over manager, not a micromanager, and not malicious, but like just getting too involved. But it was really when I had this opportunity to manage. I mean, like, I had at one point, I had like the home office facility, headquarter facilities reporting to me. I know nothing about, you don't even want me near a wrench, never mind like an HVAC system. I mean, like, I don't know anything. And but that wasn't what we talked about. We talked about her team. We talked about her leadership. We talked about how are we going to move the obstacles she was running into to get approvals for things, and how we're going to do that. We actually talked about stuff, and that's leadership, right? That stuff that you feel like when you're, Eric and I have had a couple of conversations in the last maybe 12 months or so where people would say, they talk about things that are really important leadership things, and they act as if that's not the job. Right. Like Eric talked to this person who was like,
I like the job. I like the job. I just don't like the management part. I'm like what?
Like, that's your job, but people think the job is the work, right? And that's true when you're an individual contributor. The job is the work, but over time, that the work is just the outcome of your job, not your actual job.
And that's when I say to leaders, your people's success is your success.
Yeah.
That's your job.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Your job is to help them be the best that they can be.
One of the things that I always say is, I think that people don't understand as they move from individual contributor to leader is that their job is now not to do things, but to get things done. And by that, I mean, you don't need to be the hands-on hero. You need to be the leadership hero. We are way over our half an hour, and I appreciate your willingness at 6 a.m. to talk to us for a long time. We probably could have done like one of these Joe Rogan length 4 hour.
Absolutely, we could have kept going
conversations, but there's only so much I think we should.
I think that would have descended into middle manager therapy then.
Yes.
Which is okay. I think people might actually find that interesting.
Or working through our corporate PTSD. That's
the one. That time when I was,
yeah, exactly.
So anyway, we got our tradition on our podcast is to have everybody go around and say one thing that they want to leave the audience with. And as a sort of a hazing ritual, I always make our guests go first, so you have no time to think about it. So what's one thing, Sally, that you'd like to leave the audience with?
If you're in the C-suite, it's time to raise and lift them to lead. If you're a middle manager, don't underestimate, you are in the most powerful position in your organization.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, Sally, before I jump in with my one thing, what is the best way for people to connect with you, reach you?
Google that.
All right.
Just Google that.
Awesome.
Sally Foley Lewis. There's only one of those. Thank goodness.
Awesome.
For people who are listening, that's Sally, Sally, Foley, Foley -Lewis. So if people are listening to the podcast.
And I guess I will say for my one thing, I just am so appreciative of having connected with you. You know, we ended up writing these books with the same title, and yeah, I should. Here's my book. There's Sally's book. We both have. They look different. Eric doesn't have Sally's book yet. Yeah, whatever. But but just, you know, this is the amazing thing about the world we live in today, that you can write the same, you know, write a book with the same title as somebody halfway across the world, and connect and have just an amazing conversation and share thoughts and whatever. And so it's been so great chatting with you and learning from you and learning from your book. And I know we will stay in touch, and I will pass it to Eric because he always likes to go last here. So I'll pass it to Eric.
Thanks, Jess. Ditto. Thank you.
Yeah. So Sally, also, it's been fantastic chatting with you and having this conversation. I want to leave the audience with the concept that I think there needs to be an adjustment in people's thought process as to, like, what constitutes success, what constitutes the goals of middle managers. So we were talking early in this episode about the idea of individual contributors. Like, let's stop treating that like it's a bad thing. That's a great thing. There's not enough. You can't have everybody be a CEO. Ultimately, it's just not feasible, because then, well, none of the work would get done. So there has to be an adjustment to thinking about what constitutes success, what constitutes, what your goals are. You got to train people, you got to give them support, etc. So with that, I'm going to say, thanks again, Sally Foley Lewis, for everything. And we look forward to hearing from you in the future and interacting with you again. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.